They built on my land like it already belonged to them. And the worst part is, for a little while, I almost let them. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten anybody. I didn't even call a lawyer right away. I just stood there and watched quiet as a church mouse waiting to see how far a person will go when they think nobody's going to stop them. Turns out, a whole lot farther than you'd expect. This all started on a Monday morning, the kind that doesn't feel important at the time. Slow, quiet, half-awake me, standing in the kitchen, holding a trash bag, thinking about coffee like it was a religious experience. I stepped out into the backyard, still in that fog where your brain hasn't fully clocked in yet, and that's when I saw it. A fence. Not some crooked weekend DIY mess either. I'm talking a brand new 6-foot-tall, fresh-cut wooden fence, straight as a ruler, solid, posts, clean lines, the kind of thing that takes planning money and a couple very determined people. The wood still smelled like sawdust. It looked like it had gone up sometime over the weekend while I was inside living my life completely unaware that somebody behind me had decided to redraw reality. At first I didn't panic. The property line behind my house had always been a little fuzzy looking. There was this row of older trees, some lopsided shrubs, and then the yard kind of rolled out behind that into the space belonging to the house behind mine. No fence back there before, no dramatic marker. No bright legal line glowing in the dirt. Just one of those suburban situations where everybody sort of assumes they know where things are. So I stood there squinting at a trash bag hanging off one hand thinking, maybe they finally decided to fence in their yard. Fair enough. Something about it felt off though. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong in that quiet way your gut notices before your brain catches up. But I shrugged it off, tossed the trash, and went back inside. That should have been the end of it. Later that afternoon, my lawn guy Marcus was out mowing. Marcus had been doing my yard for about 3 years. Good man, steady, quiet, not the kind to make conversation unless he's got a reason. He killed the mower, looked toward the back, then looked at me and said, "You know your property goes past that fence, right?" I actually laughed. Not because I thought he was stupid, it just sounded impossible. I told him, "Nah, I always figured the line ran around those trees." He shook his head slow, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "Man, I've been cutting this yard a long time. Your lots always look deeper than that to me." Now, Marcus wasn't dramatic. That's what got me. He said it like a man commenting on the weather, plain calm, no agenda. And somehow that made it stick harder. That night, I dug out my closing documents, which, by the way, is one of the most depressing little rituals of adulthood. You sign a mountain of papers when you buy a house, shove them into a folder, and pray you never need to look at them again. I spread everything out on the kitchen table, found the plat map, and started tracing lines with my finger like I was trying to solve a crime nobody else knew had happened. And there it was. My property didn't stop at the tree line. It went about 10 feet past it, meaning that pretty perfectly straight, fresh-smelling fence was sitting on my land. Now I didn't explode. I've lived long enough to know not every problem starts as evil. Sometimes old property markers disappear. Sometimes people go by what they were told. Sometimes bad information gets passed down like a family recipe. So I told myself maybe this was a misunderstanding, nothing more. The next evening I walked over and knocked on the back door of the house behind mine. That's when I properly met Daniel Harper. Mid-50s, easy smile, relaxed posture, one of those men who always looked like he had nowhere urgent to be. He opened the door, friendly enough, wiped his hands like he'd been working on something, and listened while I explained what I found on the map. He nodded the whole time. Then he said, "Oh yeah, the previous owner told me the line was somewhere around there." Somewhere. That one word hit me funny. Still, I kept it polite. I smiled and said, "Maybe we should double check just to be safe." And he smiled back and said, "Sure. Easy. Easy. Too easy." I went home thinking maybe this would get fixed in a few days. Maybe he'd call somebody, maybe they'd move a few posts, maybe we'd both laugh about it later and move on like grown adults. But days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Nothing changed. No survey, no update, no apology, no movement. And then one morning I heard the sound that changed everything. Trucks, tools, voices, that low mechanical hum of people building something they fully intend to keep. I walked outside, looked toward the fence, and my stomach dropped. They weren't just leaving it there, they were adding to it. A shed was going up behind that fence and not some little plastic thing you buy at a home improvement store and call a weekend project. No, this was a real structure, gravel base, spread out panels stacked neatly, workers moving with purpose, a trench running from the main house for electrical. This thing had weight to it, intention to it, permanence. I stood there with my arms crossed trying to understand how we'd gone from "sure we'll double check" to this full-blown land grab with power lines. Daniel saw me and waved like we were neighbors on a greeting card. "Just putting in a little storage," he called out. I walked a little closer, careful not to step where I already suspected my own land had been hijacked. "Looks pretty permanent for a little storage," I said. He chuckled, shrugged, figured if we're doing it, might as well do it right. "If we're doing it, that sat heavy," I told him calm as I could. "We really need to get that boundary checked before this goes any further." And he gave me that same smile again, the one that looked friendly until you noticed it never really reached his eyes. Yeah, he said. "We'll get to it." They did not get to it. 2 days later, the shed was fully built. Walls up, roof, sealed door, installed a light fixture inside glowing at dusk, like it had always belonged there. And when I stepped back and looked at the whole thing, I could finally see what my gut had been trying to tell me from the start. Part of that shed sat beyond the fence, on my side. That was the moment it stopped being a misunderstanding. You don't lay gravel-run wiring and build a structure that carefully, without deciding exactly where it's going. That takes planning. That takes confidence. That takes somebody betting the other guy won't fight back. So I stopped waiting. The next morning I called a surveyor, $950, which was painful, yes, but still cheaper than a courtroom and a blood pressure medication problem. More importantly, it meant clarity. No opinions, no somewhere around there, no neighborly folklore, just facts. A week later, they came out quiet. Crew clean truck measuring equipment, that calm professional energy people have when they do the same uncomfortable job over and over again. They walked the property, checked the records, ran their lines, and by the afternoon they were planting bright orange markers in the grass. And let me tell you something, there is nothing quite like seeing the truth staked into the ground. The fence was 8 feet onto my property. The shed was 5 feet onto my property. 5 feet doesn't sound like much until somebody else decides it doesn't matter because it belongs to you and not them. I took photos of everything, the markers, the fence, the shed base, every angle I could think of. Then that night I printed the survey, highlighted the relevant parts, and wrote a short note. Nothing emotional, no threats, just facts. "Daniel, I had the survey completed, the fence and part of the shed cross onto my property. Let's fix this before it turns into something bigger." I left it at his door and waited. 1 day, nothing. 2 days, nothing. By the end of the week, I realized he wasn't ignoring me because he hadn't seen the message. He was ignoring me because he had. And then he did something that made the whole thing almost funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. He put 2 lawn chairs in the disputed strip. Just set them out there like he was claiming beach frontage. A couple days later, he added a little fire pit, some stones around it, and suddenly this man was out there in the evenings acting like he'd discovered the American frontier. Not only was he using my land, he was staging it, performing ownership. So I walked over one more time. No smile this time, no small talk. I held the survey in my hand and said, "Daniel, this isn't a gray area anymore. You're on my property." He didn't even look rattled. He leaned back in one of those chairs and said, "You know how this works, right? People use land long enough, take care of it long enough, eventually it's basically theirs." Basically, I just stared at him. Basically, I said, "isn't legally." His smile twitched a little then, but he still didn't back down. He just shrugged and said, "We'll see." And right there, I understood something that had nothing to do with fences. This wasn't really about land anymore. This was about testing limits. This was a man seeing whether I'd defend a boundary or surrender it inch by inch just to keep the peace. So I stopped handling it like a neighbor dispute. I handled it like a violation. I called the county zoning office, kept it simple, told them I had a survey, told them a structure and fence were crossing onto my property, asked what my options were. The woman on the phone didn't make a speech. She just said, "We can send someone out." That was enough. Because once the city steps in, stubbornness stops mattering so much. Facts take over. About a week later, 2 inspectors showed up. Plain truck clipboards, measuring tools, no drama. I walked them through the yard, showed them the survey, pointed to the markers, explained the timeline. They took their own measurements, their own photos, their own notes. Then came the twist Daniel probably didn't see coming. One of the inspectors checked the shed paperwork and asked whether it had been approved for that location. Turns out, and this was beautiful in a cold, bureaucratic kind of way, even if he had a permit for the structure, it didn't cover building it over the line and inside setback restrictions. So now, it wasn't just my complaint, it was a code issue too. That's when the ground shifted. 3 days later, the notice arrived. Official, stamped, clear as day. Non-compliant structure. Improperly placed fence. Encroachment over property line. Setback violation. Remove or relocate within 30 days. No, basically. No wiggle room, no neighborly interpretation. 30 days. That same evening, Daniel knocked on my door. And let me tell you, arrogance looks very different when it's carrying fines on its back. He stood there rubbing the back of his neck, speaking softer than I'd ever heard him speak. "Can we talk?" I stepped outside. He tried the whole routine. The city was overreacting, the rules were confusing. Surely there was a way to keep things as they were. Then finally he got to the real point. "What if you just sign something?" he said. "Give permission." Permission. That word told me everything. He didn't want fairness. He wanted free access to something he'd already helped himself to. So I asked him one question. "Are you planning to buy that portion of the land?" He blinked. "Well, no, not really." And that was it. "No," I said. No speech, no rant, no grand performance. Just no. Day 29 came and went. Nothing changed. Day 30 passed. Still nothing. Day 31, the fines started piling up daily. Then day 45 rolled around under this gray, overcast sky that made the whole neighborhood feel like it was holding its breath. Around 9 in the morning, a contractor truck pulled up with a trailer behind it. 2 workers got out. No yelling, no showdown, just consequences. They started with the shed unscrewing panels, disconnecting wiring, cutting through the base, breaking it apart piece by piece. The little light inside flickered once, then died. After that, they moved to the fence. Boards came down, posts got yanked, holes were filled, grass was pressed back into place like somebody trying desperately to erase evidence of a bad idea. Daniel stood out there watching the whole thing, arms hanging at his sides, not looking at me, not saying a word. By early afternoon, it was all gone. The shed, the fence, the chairs, the fire pit, every last bit of it. And the silence after, man, that silence was satisfying. Not loud, not dramatic, just clean, open space, empty grass. My land looking like my land again. And I stood there for a while, not smiling, not celebrating, just breathing it in. Because the truth is, it was never only about dirt, it was about the line, the invisible one people think they can cross if they do it slowly enough, confidently enough, politely enough. And the hard lesson, the one that hit me later, is that some people count on your decency more than your weakness. They know good people hesitate. Good people try to avoid conflict. Good people give second chances. And that's exactly what makes good people easy to test. There's a difference between being kind and being available for disrespect. I almost learned that too late. A couple weeks later, I saw Daniel standing near the back again, right where everything used to be. No shed now, no fence, no kingdom, just him and an empty stretch of grass he'd once tried to turn into his. He looked over at me. For a second, I thought maybe I'd get an apology. Instead, he just gave one small nod and went back inside. And honestly, that was enough. So now I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have stayed calm and let the system handle it like I did, or would you have stepped in a whole lot earlier and shut it down before it got that far? And here's the bigger question. At what point does being a good neighbor turn into giving someone permission to take advantage of you? Tell me where you land in the comments. Who was right? Who was wrong? And have you ever dealt with somebody who mistook your patience for weakness?